Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this guest lecture. My name is Georgia, and I'm a PhD student at the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse, which is a research center at ANU, and more specifically at the School of Regulation and Global Governance. And today, together with my fellow PhD scholar, Roxana, we will be presenting the work that we do at the Hothouse in relation to the topic of this course, so health promotion, and specifically also the work that we do in our own PhD work. So before I start, though, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the First Nations of this country or of Australia, since I'm currently not based in Australia but in Europe, and really pay my respect to elder past, present, and emerging, and remind that we meet on this land that was never ceded. And that's, we have the privilege of studies and working on this land that has been of First Nations for a very long time. And also to remind that in global and public health, unfortunately, we're still perpetuating the same practices and colonial thinking that has been impacting people in Australia, so the First Nation in Australia, but also in other countries for centuries. So let me tell you a bit more of what we are doing. So to start to talk about the work that we do at the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse, we need to talk about all the multiple crises that we're currently facing in this world. And probably as many of you know, we are facing a lot of different health crises at the same time. So, for example, obesity and overweight, especially in the Western part of the world, in the global north, but not only. The increase of pandemics in recent years, with COVID-19 being one of the most recent one, and the one that we all still struggle with. But also heat waves that are really killing a lot of people all around the world. And I can tell you this has been quite a headline in Europe in recent weeks because of the number of people that unfortunately died because of the heat waves this summer. But also we are consuming very limited number of plants and animal food, which not just has an impact on people's health and the food that is then also becoming more processed, but also has an impact on the land that we depend on, and so on nature more broadly. And so there's not just the health impact that we're seeing, but also a more broad impact on the environment and the planet that we depend on. And, we know that we have already crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, which is not just climate change, but many others. And this has a huge impact on the balance of the earth and nature that, of course, we are part of and depend on, and has then obviously repercussion also for our own health. And this is very clear in Australia with a lot of wildfires, especially the 2018 wildfires that, of course, impacted people directly, but also wildlife. So something that it's very felt very closely to people in Australia, and also in some other parts of the world where wildfires have been really jeopardizing people's livelihood and the animal in nature. But in addition to that, we also are living in a very unequal society. Inequity is spiking with few individuals being very rich and very well positioned in the system, and a lot of people actually experiencing poverty or extreme poverty, and actually more people going into poverty than ever before. We the really manifestation of this, it was quite clear during the COVID pandemic, where we got a few rich individuals that increased their wealth and they became more rich during the pandemic, while a lot of people lost their livelihood and they struggled to keep their house, their work, and really struggled to survive. But all of these crises, as you know, have already mentioned in part, are all interconnected and kind of reinforcing each other. So all this kind of ill health, social inequities, and environmental degradation we see are all part of a broader polycrisis, as we refer it nowadays, which has some, common roots. But the idea is that we would like to live in a world that looks very different from this one, that we would like to really live in a world that wants to achieve what we call planetary health equity. So the equitable enjoyment of good health in a stable Earth system. So a place where we are all, so all humans are healthy and their well-being is taken care of, but also we are in balance with the rest of nature, and the planet it's in balance. But achieving that is quite complicated, and of course, to get onto this path, we really need to understand what are the things that are creating the current polycrisis. And of course, describing, the symptoms, or describing all I have said in the previous slides is obviously very important, and we need research that really shows what the problems are. But we're not gonna find new paths to achieve planetary health equity if we don't really understand the roots of those crises. And for us, in the work that we do, is really understanding and tackling the system behind the polycrisis, what we call the consumptogenic system, the web of institutions, policy, commercial activities, and norms that incentivize and reward excessive production and consumption of fossil fuel reliant goods and services, which of course have a very negative impact on our health, on the environment, and also on equity. Now, this is obviously a very complex system, and in the work we do, we are trying to really understand and unpack the system. But I want to bring this back to the topic of this course, which is health promotion. So the definition of health promotion, as is defined by the Ottawa chapter from WHO, is that health promotion is the process of enabling people to increase control over or to improve their health. And here I would really like to highlight the word enabling, because in order to enable people to really take control and improve their health, those people need to be within a system that really allows them to do so. And that's why, coming back to the definition of the consumptogenic system, really understanding the web of institution, policy, commercial activities, and norms is so important to really find a system that can then create the base, the foundation for people to really have control and improve their health. And so that's why we think that the work that we do at the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse, really it's about as well about health promotion, because we are trying to understand how do we create a system that actually does that enabling for people. But in order to do that, I think there are some things that we really need to shift in the way we understand health promotion, the way we approach health promotion. And the first thing is really shifting responsibility. It's not that much about the responsibility of the single individual, but it's more about the responsibility of the system, of the structures that are currently in place or that should be in place to achieve planetary health equity. It is also about power dynamics and really understanding those dynamics within the system to really understand where the leverage points are to really achieve a better outcome for people. And also, it is not just about describing the problem or trying to fix one thing at a time. As much as that, obviously, it's important also to do. It's also important to zoom out and really look at the system as a whole in all its complexity and really understand what are the interests and the institution and ideas that kind of interacting with each other really perpetuate the consumptogenic we currently have, and how can we find a leverage point for change to transition to a system that prioritizes planetary health equity. Now, I want to pause here to say that, of course, this is, kind of an overview of the work we do. And, we will be very happy for you to reach out and ask more questions about what we're doing and how this, it's more linked to health promotion. But what we decided to do now, it's also to bring two more tangible examples of what we mean by health promotion through a planetary health equity lens, through the work that we do in our own PhD work. So myself and also my colleague, which will speak after me. So the first topic that we will talk about is philanthropy, which is the topic of my PhD. And this is quite related to health promotion, simply because philanthropic organizations are part of this complex system, and they are also in global health and public health a big actor when it comes to health promotion, in supporting health promotion activities in different ways through their funding, through their expertise. But what do I mean by philanthropy? I think that people might have different ideas. You might, in your head have a certain idea what philanthropy is. Some of you might think of philanthropy as, people giving their time and their money to other people to help them. And indeed, philanthropy as a word that comes from the Greek and basically means love to humanity. But then some people might also think of very wealthy, mostly white individuals that give money to different causes, to different groups to achieve different goals. And of course, philanthropy is both of these things, but I would say it's even much more than that. It's a very complex ecosystem of different actors, so different organizations, different individuals that are interconnected and want to achieve certain goals, ideally for the benefit of society as a whole, sometimes for the benefit of specific groups. When it comes to global and public health more specifically, I think there are some major actors that are particularly interesting, as also in relation to health promotions. And here I put some names that people might be familiar with. There are obviously more, but the idea here is really to highlight that some of these big actors are really important, not just because they focus on health promotion in different ways or support different health promotion activities, but because they have been argued in the literature, they have a very important position within the international global health system in really influencing priorities, to either influencing what are our global or public health priorities worldwide or national-wide as well. But how does those philanthropic organizations actually decide what to support? I mean, there's a lot of things we can support in terms of health promotion, but what are the things that those organizations focus on? And of course, they're very diverse and they focus on very many different things, but there are some factors that really determines what they're going to support, and that obviously impacts the type of health promotion that will result from there. And here I would like to give you a bit of an understanding of what those factors are, just to, and then bring in some example of type of health promotion that we have seen in the philanthropic sector. So the first thing is that organizations themselves, but also this comes out of research, is that they're trying to fill in a gap. So they don't really fund things that have been funded by governments or other organizations, or tend not to do so, but really trying to understand other things that hadn't been funded very much or that they lack funding, and really put their money in there. So really that determines then what kind of topics they focus on, and then, the type of health promotion that they might be supporting. The other things is that they're really keen in measuring things. So again, this seems to be quite prominent in big organization, and in my research, I'm trying to explore if this is something that is widespread in different organizations from big to small in the global north mostly, which are where the biggest organizations are actually sitting. But the idea here is really like, can we measure what we are doing? Can we prove, with data that we are improving things? So they want to measure their success. And that obviously kind of determines what kind of thing they're going to support, because some things are easier to measure than others. And it's very common, for example, in the global health arena to really see organization, measuring things in terms of how many lives they have been saving through the activity they have been supporting. The other things is that they tend to be very innovative, or really thinking about supporting innovation and technical solution. For example, in the biomedical field and the technology field seems to be what they tend to go for. That doesn't mean that all organizations focus on that, of course. And again, I'm really trying with my research to expand a bit on this concept that's being kind of reiterated in the literature as the main focus of philanthropy. But there are also other things that might influence, of course, how philanthropic organizations make decisions. And, it's not really clear yet. And it's, again, part of my research to understanding what is the role of existing evidence or community needs versus, for example, the funder or the board preferences, and potentially other factors, political, geopolitical, dynamics that might influence their decision. But all those factors then feeds in what organization might focus on. And what we see is that there are some topics that tend to kind of come quite often, especially in some of the organizations I have shown you in the previous slides, like infection diseases, for example, women's well-being, which is a bit broader than just women's health, and then food security. Now, I'm going to bring these three topics and make some example now about what kind of health promotion activities then they have been doing in relation to those topics, and then try to put a planetary health equity lens on them. So when it comes to infection diseases, one of the main, let's say, health promotion strategies that they've been using is vaccination campaigns. This is something that you probably all very much aware of. It's something that organizations like the Gates Foundation really push for when it comes, for example, to polio vaccinations, but also other type of vaccination, for example, for children under 5. So this is a kind of heavy health promotion activity of really going for vaccinates your kids. It's really important. And of course, this is, vaccination are a life-saving tool. And it's very important that we do that, of course. When it comes to women's well-being, there's this quite, interest in providing contraception. So the idea of contraception with a very powerful tool for women well-being. So not just women health, but also women to be able to decide for their own lives, and also allowing more girls to remain in school. So that's one other way that health promotion has been kind of supported in case of women health. And then when it comes to food security, I think it's like the incentives of picking up new crops. So this is very much linked to, let's say, the impact of climate change or other environmental impacts on the environment, and how that has impacted food production, especially in some part of the world. And obviously that is generally linked from a health point of view of health security. So people not having enough food for feeding themselves and their kids, and the importance of increasing food production in some places, and the promotion of picking up a certain type of new crops that will kind of solve the problem for the livelihood of the farmer, but also for the health of the people in that specific place. Now, if we put a planetary health equity lens to those health promotion activities, then we start to ask additional questions, which doesn't mean that we discard those campaigns or those strategies for health promotion, but it's more about going one step further and really looking at the system around, the problem that has been identified and that the organization wants to tackle, and really understanding, what are the other things that we might have not looked at that maybe will have also a broader impact on the health of people, and that could really lead for a better health promotion in a sense. So when it comes to vaccination, I think some of the questions that sometimes are not asked is that what are the social and economic conditions that allow a certain pathogen to spread? And even if we do vaccination, which is, of course, is very important and allows to reduce the number of cases, sometimes we can even get to the point to basically not have the disease around anymore. That doesn't really tackle some of the social and economic conditions that have created the spreading of the pathogen in that specific area or community, and that might be basically the path for other diseases to spread quite easily. So we might fix, let's say, a problem one side, but then we don't really tackle the roots. Another things, it can be like not really understanding how feasible a campaign of like this can be in certain local context because of lack of understanding of the context, or maybe also like asking, is this actually the main health priority for that specific population? And there's been argument in the literature that sometimes certain type of health promotion takes over because of the interest of philanthropic organizations, but it's not actually the main thing that that specific area or population will need, especially what they will come from them as a need in that specific area. When it comes to contraception, some of the things that we could ask if we put this lenses on is that, what do women want? Is that actually contraception the main things that women need in this specific context for their liberation or their well-being? Or if there's something else that we're probably not looking at, and maybe contraception is just part of the picture but not the main thing we should focus on. Are we actually perpetuating colonial practices by doing this? There's a lot of literature discussing, for example, contraception and the problematic, thinking behind the fact that we have like Western philanthropic organization coming in the majority world, providing contraception, but this sometimes can be really linked to population control, which has a very strong colonial roots. And also, does this not play more into the individual responsibility rather than the structures and more the system responsibility? I mean, if we want to improve women's health and women's well-being, is this contraception and them taking the contraception really the thing we should focus on? And finally, when it comes to food security, there are, broader questions we could ask about the consequences of having new crops in a certain area. Can be GMOs or can be simply other crops that are not, indigenous to that area. And really asking what are the consequences for biodiversity, if we shift to a different type of crop, what is the outcome for farmers' well-being? This has been, quite a big discussion when it comes to the Green Revolution in India, which was driven by the Rockefeller and also some other organization. And that obviously increased food production, has some good impacts in terms of people accessing food, but at the same time brought a lot of farmers into poverty, and that had a really big consequence on the mental health of these people, and there were actually an increase in suicide rates. But also, what are the consequences for future generation, right? Losing the culture around certain crops that are very indigenous to the area, or the losing of biodiversity. What does it mean then, not for the people right now that access the food, but future generations that are not here yet? So you can see, you can really look at an issue and a health promotion strategy, in a very narrow way, or you can try to ask all these questions to have a more broader understanding of what you're trying to achieve. That doesn't mean that that specific campaign is not good, but it kind of triggers this kind of system thinking approach. And here I would like to conclude by basically saying that when we see a health issue, we really need to ask what will really enable people to increase control and improve their health. So in this picture, we see, the really big push on, ending polio and supporting the end of polio. And it's a very important campaign, of course, that Bill Gates more specifically have been very far front on. But like, what are the other things that we might not thinking about that will really enable people to take care of their own health? And again, this brings me back to the 3-dimension I was kind of referring to when I looked at the system, shifting responsibility, understanding power dynamic, and having this more zoom out approach to look at issues, and really understanding what interest with institution and ideas kind of comes together to create a system that is then the foundation of the problem that we might see, but also the solution that we might find. So yeah, while specific achievements are important, I want to reiterate that, I come from a biomedical background and I'm all for vaccinations, for example. I think they're a very great tool. Sometimes if we want to really achieve, this broader health and well-being for people, we really need to think in a complex way. So we need to think complex thinking. It's really detrimental. It's really central, sorry, to understand, what can we do to have a very good outcome for people and planet. And of course, if we really want to go back to the definition of health promotion, really enabling people to increase control over and improve their health. Now, I would like to give the space to my colleague to present her topic, which is food or food systems, and also to give you some conclusions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio. Hi, everyone. My name is Roxana. I'm also a PhD scholar at the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we meet and pay my respect to the elders past and present. Now, for the next few minutes, I'd like to invite you on a journey about food systems, health, and health promotion. And I'll start off with a brief description of food systems, which are networks that are needed to produce and transform food so it reaches us as consumers. Food systems include an entire range of actors and their interlinked activities that are involved in the production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and even disposal of food products. The food systems are also comprised of subsystems, what we know as farming, waste management, input supply, and so on. They also interact with other key systems like energy, trade, and of course, health. Therefore, a structural change in the food system might originate from a change in another system. And examples here include how agriculture is impacted by changes of energy prices and the cost associated with energy supply, or for instance, how health and nutrition is depicted in labels in different types of foods regulated by the food standards in Australia and New Zealand. Within the food system, it's also important to consider sustainability. That is, our ability to produce and consume foods today in ways that do not prevent future generations from having the same rights and access to foods tomorrow. However, to truly achieve sustainable food systems, we must deliver food security and nutrition for everyone in ways that the economic, social, and environmental conditions are not compromised. What this means is that food systems have to be profitable throughout. So this is economic sustainability. They have to have broad-based social benefits, social sustainability, and they should have a positive or at least a neutral impact on the environment, hence environmental sustainability. However, what we often see today in our current food systems, and this is the example in Australia, is that different categories of foods are available in different quantities, qualities, safety measurements, as well as prices. And what happens and what we often see is that the present industrial food systems really treat food as a tradable commodity rather than a basic human need or a right. So instead of having access to the 5 core groups of foods, ranging from veggies to fruits, grains, dairy, and alternatives, meats, eggs, and so on, what we actually see most of the times when we access the shelves in the supermarket are these products, discretionary choices. They don't really fit into the 5 core food groups because they're not essential for our health. Actually, some of them are so harmful that they have to be limited or restricted. The name of these discretionary choices is ultra-processed foods. Now, ultra-processed foods have been well defined in the academic scholarship using the NOVA classification system, and they sit at the very bottom of the ladder on the right-hand side, right here. So if we go from left to right, we really understand how processing is impacting the health and nutritional aspect of our foods. So in the first category in green, we have fruits, nuts, veggies, meat, and eggs. Second, we have processed ingredients such as oil, butter, vinegar, salt, and so on, which are used as condiments for our meals. The third category is processed foods, which have been fermented, pickled, and so forth, Here we have freshly made bread, cheeses, and tinned fruits and veggies. The last category, however, is the most important one because ultra processed foods, as defined by the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology Department, is that UPFs are formulations of ingredients. They're food-like products made mostly, if not exclusively, of industrial use, and they're resulting from a series of complex industrial processes. In a nutshell, we cannot recreate ultra processed foods at home using the ingredients we have available in our pantry. UPFs generally have a very poor nutrient profile. They're often high in sugar and salt and fat. They're low in fiber, protein, and micronutrients, but they're very rich in additives, emulsifiers, stabilizers, colorants, sweeteners, and so forth. This makes them highly palatable and attractive to see, smell, touch, and taste. Because of that, ultra processed foods or UPFs are also strongly linked to very poor health outcomes, such as increased risks of chronic diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and even certain types of cancers. Now, understanding ultra processed foods within food systems deeply matters because how food is produced, packaged, promoted, and sold today is instrumental for deconstructing some of the most important production and consumption patterns we see. That is also a major reason why modern food systems would really not exist without the packaging, the labeling, and the advertising, also known as gimmicks or tactics used by marketing teams. The same marketing teams are present in some of the biggest food corporations or food producing corporations. And here we have an example which is from the US, but the companies are very much present here in Australia and in other countries across the globe. And if we make distinction of the two companies that also produce non-food products, we can see that from Coca-Cola all the way to Nestle, even though there's such a variety of brands and options, in reality, it's only a handful of corporations that really produce most of the foods, ultra-processed foods, that is. And even more important is how fast they grow and develop. Quite recently, one of the biggest breakfast cereal producer, Kellogg, was acquired by a huge confectionery giant, Ferrero, for those familiar with brands like Kinder and other chocolate products. So we see this concentration of corporate power in the food system that evolving quite rapidly. And this brings me then to the next slide and the major focus of today's guest lecture, the factors that influence health and environmental conditions in food systems. Now, in the interest of time, I will speak about three major factors and how these influence sustainability: economic, social, and environmental. And I'll start off with corporate power. Here we have the ability of food corporations to reinforce this notion of consumer empowerment and choice and even individual responsibility. Corporate power also translates into the ability of food producers to create different impressions of a diverse choice, as we've seen in the previous slide. There's a multitude of brands that in appearance they are competing against each other, but in reality they belong to the same parent company. Last but not least, technology is a major point of advantage for huge food corporations. It is oftentimes used to optimize profits, not production, and to reduce and inhibit competition. And this aspect is very well described in a recent book by Jennifer Clapp called The Titans of Industrial Agriculture, where we see how various food corporations use their power to stay big. They shape the markets, they shape technology, and they shape policy to acquire their rivals, to access finance, to develop technologies that are suiting their business models. And this way, they keep increasing demand for their food products. This consolidation of power is also an element of the second factor, which is all about food regulation and access. In the current system, the food systems that we are experiencing, we see an unequal and unequitable distribution of land, resources, and foods, which all are leading to poor health and environmental outcomes. There's also a very clear policy framework that keeps reinforcing neoliberal models of free market. And in this sense, neoliberalism should be understood for its two major pillars, that is financial deregulation, and the second one, economic globalization. Both are focusing on the economy, on growing the economy, improving the economy, without acknowledging that this is not in the interest, nor in the advantage of human health and the planet's health. Last but not least, food regulation and access has really focused a lot historically on security, so having that kind of caloric package rather than focusing on what is nourishing and what is healthy for people. Last but not least, the third factor worth considering is actually the system of patterns, the production and consumption patterns of our foods. We see a dominance of monoculture and very intense agriculture practices. This has been depicted early on in one of the slides. Globally, our food is really derived from 12 plants and 5 animal species. And the way in which the plants and the animals are raised and harvested and then also processed really perpetuates a vicious cycle that undermines the environment, leads to exacerbated weather conditions that are worsening than the practices, agriculture, as well as the working and living conditions of farmers and communities in the areas where agricultural practices are deeply industrialized. This also gives space and increases risks of pests and diseases. And what we noticed a lot in terms of food corporations and their dominance in global space is that the producers of seeds, for instance, are also the producers of herbicides and pesticides. So instead of making sure the food is healthier and better for the environment and the planet, they are worsening some of these conditions that are affecting our ability to have sustainable food systems. So in a nutshell, the economic, social, and environmental sustainability realms. And with that in mind, I would like to share some examples of current and ongoing marketing tactics that are happening against the economic, social, and environmental sustainability of food systems. Now, for the purpose of this guest lecture, I would like to introduce just two marketing tactics. The first one is greenwashing, which is a deceptive practice used to misrepresent environmental impact of products, processes, or producers in ways that they seem beneficial for the environment without there being any accuracy, transparency, or proof. The second tactic is health washing or clean washing, which represents exaggerated or misleading health claims usually found in foods. An example here could be percentages of vitamins that are present in confectionery products or the use of natural flavors, although it is not described that the flavors themselves do not have health benefits through consumption, and the list can go on. So for now, we will present greenwashing and lean washing tactics for each of the three categories, and afterwards we're going to wear a planetary health equity lens to better challenge, appreciate, and criticize some of these tactics. So the first example is greenwashing in terms of economic sustainability. And technology is often used as a fix, especially artificial intelligence, the way that we can achieve breakthroughs and improve our practices. In reality, technology and technological fixes are good for profit making. The companies that can afford good technology invest in it in ways that their competitors cannot, and this way they secure a larger percentage of the market. An example of lean washing in the same space would be on promoting consumer choice, efficiency, and power. So we have information like calorie counts or portion control, which really overwhelm everyday consumers, and they provide this false sense of solutions when actually the problem is structural and not individual. And if we were to wear a planetary health equity lens, what we would see is that there are important problems with these forms of tactics, these marketing communication options. So what we can ask ourselves is what makes these assumptions credible in the first place? Who would benefit framing health and sustainability as individual choices? And how do these tactics actually sustain overconsumption? In terms of social sustainability, a greenwashing gimmick that is quite common is this portrayal of 100% recyclability or recyclable products, a solution to a plastic or even a climate crisis. In reality, recyclability is not a solution, and 100% recyclability is not possible. What is more, when we're considering foods, we have to be very careful with the treatment of packaging because recycled packaging can be very toxic compared to virgin plastic or virgin forms of packaging. An example of lean washing would be using product reformulation as a mask to create cheaper and even more unhealthier products that are then disproportionately consumed by lower income groups. So an example here is when soft commodities like coffee and cacao are affected by the extreme weather conditions and the prices go up. The same parent companies, instead of making sure the farmers are well treated and the land is actually sustainable, they create or reformulate some of their popular products, even though they are more detrimental to human health and the environment. And using a planetary health equity lens, we can ask, what do these narratives like recyclability really reveal about industries and the real actors that are driving the climate crisis, and why reducing production is rarely part of the corporate sustainability strategy? How do these strategies actually impact the less powerful actors that are still part of the system? Third and last example, environmental sustainability in terms of greenwashing. A tactic often used is to develop industry-led labeling or certifications. They actually fit the business as usual practices. The industry already has a well-suited report, and it just creates a label to portray itself in a better light. And in terms of lean washing, what we've seen recently is research that is funded to challenge some of the knowledge that is already there. So, for instance, challenge the definition and the classification of ultra processed foods and promote them as actually being healthy and environmentally sustainable. And wearing a planetary health equity lens, we can really ask ourselves, how do the industry backed labels really defend profit over real change? Who benefits from the research funded by industry, and what voices are ignored or even challenged, and what really allows industry to be so influential when it comes to food regulation and communication? And I'd like to finish here with an example of a well-known chocolate producer that has a purple cow on its logo. Recently, it developed a Cocoa Life label meant to help cocoa sourcing farmers in the countries where they have production of cocoa, sugar, and palm oil to be better off in terms of environmental challenges. So this label is a clear form of deceptive sustainability labeling, greenwashing that really hides evidence of environmental degradation, of child labor, and even child slavery within the chocolate supply chains. And what it can help us as an example is to really criticize when we see a marketing tactic that promotes specific products, processes, or producers. What really is the purpose of the tactic, whose interest it serves, and whether the tactic, the communication, the narrative can be checked and verified. And this, in broader terms, really helps us understand the difference between individual and the collective, the group, both in terms of opportunity as well as responsibility. It helps us navigate the power dynamics and the hierarchies in a different way, and invites a bit more perspective, that is a systems thinking perspective over the ideas, interests, and institutions that maintain the systems that are so detrimental to human health and the health of our planet. And even though every step towards improving food systems really matters, health, environmental sustainability, and well-being remain deeply complex issues, and they do require complex thinking and research. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. We have prepared a brief list of references should you be interested in learning more about planetary health equity and the conceptogenic system, about philanthropy and food systems. My colleague and I are very grateful for your time. If you have any questions or comments, please do reach out. You have our email addresses and LinkedIn accounts into this slide. We also kindly invite you to learn more about the work of the Planetary Health Equity. You have the QR codes from our website, as well as our very famous Saving the World webinar series that takes place every month for an hour. We invite scholars and practitioners from different walks of life to talk about important topics as well as emerging trends in the field of planetary health equity. That is the achievement of good health for all in a stable Earth system. Thank you.